Read the Canadian Mosaic, Section 3. Our objectives. In this section, you will find out about the people of Canada, and we will learn about Canadian culture. We have two key terms, melting pot and reserve. We've had the word reservation before. This is similar. Let's go ahead and read the intro first. Over the years, Canada has been as welcoming to immigrants as the United States. However, one important difference between the countries is the way in which they view immigration. The U.S. considers itself to be a melting pot, or a country in which all cultures blend together to form a single culture. In this view, immigrants are encouraged to adopt American ways. Canadians view immigration in a slightly different way, as one Canadian journalist explains. Canadians believe in a mosaic of separate pieces, with each chunk becoming part of the whole physically, but retaining its own separate identity, color, and taste. This certainly makes for an interesting mix. Importantly, it provides Canadians with an identity peg, one major way to see themselves as different from Americans, as they must, and as they are. And that was Andrew H. Malcolm who said that. So in this section, we're going to read, as you can see, these next couple pages. We're going to read about the people of Canada, French Canadians, the First Nations, the Inuits, and then immigrants, and then finally about Canadian culture. So it's a short reading. First, the people of Canada. Today, Canada has a population of more than 31 million people. Many of them are immigrants. At first, Canada's leaders preferred Christian European settlers. At times, laws set limits on immigrants who were Jews, Asians, or Africans. But that has changed. Today, people of all ethnic groups move to Canada. French Canadians. Sometimes the ties among Canadians are not as strong as those among Americans. People in the U.S. rarely talk about forming independent states or countries. Some Canadian groups do. French Canadians in Quebec are concerned about preserving their heritage. Special laws promote French culture and language. Street and advertising signs are written in both French and English. But many French Canadians want Quebec to be a separate country. To show their determination, they have a license plate that reads, sorry, I can't read French, Je me souviens, or I remember. This phrase refers to remembering their French heritage. The First Nations. Canada's Indigenous peoples, called First Nations, also want to preserve their culture. Remember the word Indigenous. We had that from earlier in the year. The word Indigenous has to do with a native group. Let me find the definition for you here real quick. Indigenous is originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, the native, so the native people there. They are trying to fix past problems by working with existing governments. In Canada, as in the U.S., early European settlers took over the native people's lands. Many indigenous peoples were sent to reserves, or areas that the government set aside for them, similar to reservations in the U.S. Others were denied equal rights. Recently, laws have been passed allowing First Nations to use their own languages in their school. All right, here is a map, or a couple pie charts. The first one over here, the origin of immigrants in the year 2002. For Canada, most of immigrants from Asia, a large percent from Africa and Europe, very few from the United States back in 2002, and then South America and the Caribbean. All right, then if we look at the ethnic groups that actually comprised Canada in 2005, most are Canadian. a large percent from British origin, French origin, other origin, Asian origin, and then we have other, and then the Inuits and indigenous Indians there. All right, next page. I'll read about the Inuits here. Here's the community of the Cheminot in British Columbia. Canada's Inuits live in the Arctic for centuries as nomadic hunters and gatherers. Remember, the word nomadic means they don't have a permanent home. They had excellent survival skills and were fine craft workers. They made everything they needed using available materials such as snow, stone, animal bones, and driftwood. Modern technology, however, allows them to buy the clothes and tools they used to make. Many Inuits have lost their traditional skills. As a result, some feel they are losing their identity. So it was important that they were nomadic hunter and gatherers early on. Since living in the Arctic, you couldn't really settle in one area very well. Next, let's move on to immigrants. Because Britain and France were the first countries to colonize Canada, most Canadians were of British or French descent by the late 1800s. By the 1920s, many immigrants came from Central and Eastern Europe to farm the prairies in the West. But when the Depression hit in 1929, there was no longer a need for as many workers. The government then restricted immigration. And you've seen a map of where the French people sailed the St. Lawrence and the fur traders and went further inland than many British did. After World War II, the economy began to grow again. With the need for many workers, millions of immigrants came to Canada. Many of them were from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and settled mainly in large urban areas. For example, many Asian immigrants settled in Vancouver and Toronto. Since World War II, Canada's population has more than doubled. Much of that growth is because of the immigrants and their children. All right, next let's look at Canadian culture. And you can see playing hockey on an outdoor ice rink here. Canada has made a special effort to encourage people to be Canadian and to express their ethnic heritage at the same time. One cultural issue does unite most Canadians. They feel that the U.S. has too much influence on their culture. Even today, Canadians search for ways to express their unique culture. Canadian writers have long been famous for their work, from Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables to writers of today such as Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro. Canadian literature is popular throughout the world. Canadian singers have made contributions to cultural life as well. Popular Canadian singers such as Shania Twain and Celine Dion, so this book's a little dated, more like Drake and Avril Lavigne. Many singers maintain their ties to Canada, even though their jobs often require them to be elsewhere. Since the 1960s, the Canadian recording industry has become a billion-dollar business. Another billion-dollar industry in Canada is sports. Ice hockey is Canada's national sport. Every year, hockey teams from the U.S. and Canada compete for the Stanley Cup, a Canadian prize. Hockey serves not only as a national pastime, but also as an important symbol of national identity. Well, I wish I could end this recording.